We'll be getting on the Brims right here. It is currently 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, April 26, 2026. When I currently recorded this, we'll be continuing on from where I left off. I was about to. There's a video about the Florida jobs economy that will be posted before this video. This video is a whole separate, different topic. I'm gonna get on with it. So I'll be explaining my music manifesto and how it correlates to Motenism. Motenism plays like a large part of how I think, operate, and function in society, or how I change society as a living part of a huge other factor of different many other things happening behind the scene. Something to do with coaches and something to do with music. Music has played large parts in how I operate and function or even imagine things and piece them together. Roblox's slogan is an example of somebody who's failed to be able to pull that off for 2 decades. Somebody like me is somebody who's lived for 2 decades, but have not been able to pull it for as long as Roblox has done it for. By the time it's 2039, I could say that I can theoretically, confidently say I've done it and held it on longer for than Roblox. Now, if we even survive at 2039, that'd be a whole other conversation for another story. But I'll be reading off of my manifesto that I've written down in Dedox fileverse in a file of mine, and I'll be reading it and narrating it to you and explaining. If I do explain things, then I do explain things. This will just be a podcast. This is not a video with edits. It'll just be me reading what I wrote down in my thoughts and sort of my own manifesto that is the exact opposite of what Palantir wrote down. And I hope you take the note what I mean by when I say these things about music as a as a whole thing, right? Not music now. I mean music, everything, right? Not in general, not mainstream, not even my music. I feel like something is that there's a purpose to why we human as a human race have so many neurons in the first place. There are a lot of things AI can't do, but whole different video for another day. I'll be reading my music manifesto and Motenism. With how things are, I want to leave in my advice for those struggling in the music scene out there who want to be the kind to have very ballsy moves when it comes to music production, ideas, creativity, and expression. I'm somebody who has been making music or been at music for 6 years by now, since March 2020 officially, and something that I often get asked about. Why I haven't quit making music after all this time, with the amounts of albums and singles I'd made totaling above 200 songs in the making. Here is what keeps me going. For first, I don't agree with adhering to such algorithm or amending to it if one exists in the vast internet sea which has expanded since the late 2000s. I've visited numerous genres in my music and have tried honing in my quality of sound by revisiting certain sounds I felt would have been worth refining or needing to add touch up on, maybe even inventing a genre along the way. Most of the music industry and stupidity is what drives me insane, but I grew up just like that and hating it. I grew up in some indie spaces back in the day around the 2000s and at the end of the 2010s, but more like my activity was around at the end of the 2010s. Lived around online communities that posted their experimental tracks every Tuesday or Friday on their forum pages, or video making a nightcore version of a song that I never knew about. I was a little youngling being exposed to the raw and vulnerable nature of indie creators back in the old days, before proto AI was a thing, before AI and all the gizmo and file I see every day as shot content form on the internet. I often think about the tears and the crying that these indie makers perspire often on a weekly basis, sacrificing possible sellout fame over their knack for wisdom, expression, and an expansive mindset. It's what keeps them feeling alive, and not many know what that is anymore. I think about it all the time. I feel a tight pain in my stomach each time I check their counters on their socials, on small sites or popular sites. It was because they only had 10 or 120 listeners or followers checking in on their business. Nobody knew if they existed beyond a small content creation scene back in 2011 over to 2016, where many have since left the music scene or continued under a new name. This was a huge thing back then that many do not in fact talk about at all much, and it sometimes disturbs me how many people just forget somebody's name. But for me, on the other hand, I remember it all. It's just like yesterday when I remember dubstep being modernized, the day drum and bass was commodity, the time complextra was colorized, when rock split into more branches, when VTubers came to fruition, the trance scene getting privatized, the industry's dreams shaking their pop scenes, the industry plant issue increasing in rapid activity, the NDAs that were signed in the music business being absolutely common, the first proto-AI for music, the very sites that were invented to download music from, and the very first internet lawsuits from the early 2000s and the end of the 90s. All the dances that were turned trendy, all the anime song remixers and AMVs, the classical trap remix songs, the meme song revolution, the hyper popularization of gimmick in music, the fascination with gatekeeping your music, the accessibility of music, and a number of indie artists being discovered, the discovery of artists we've never knew about until now because of everything being easy to find, and the very first sites to secretly give out free music downloads and the communities that formed in them. This is a long list to follow. We built entire friend groups on heavy computers and blocky equipment, and the very first iPhone containing Pendulum's first official album on it for download is one of my earliest memories of experiencing such. Not when I was a baby, of course, but a little after when I figured out what an iPhone was at around 60 years old. We make cultures around music humor, which you don't see a lot of kids doing back then when internet was not even there. Like, no one ever thought of doing forums back then because there was no such thing as it. We ripped off of merchandise of our favorite artists, the trips you took to steal CDs and attire of your favorite artist, the days when you ran around wearing a t-shirt and getting friends because of such, the time we face called people and immediately recognized the song by name and artist name. We can't even do that anymore without it being a TikTok trend, a gatekeeping issue, and a drama starting thing, or an internet sensation that has to be popular to make it all make sense. I promise you there are kids and teens out there who don't even remember what they hear or understand. And then there are that few that listen to thousands of songs each month without ever checking who was it made from. Nobody reads the fine print in contracts like a songs maker or producer, which I always get asked about is why I keep saying my name all the time. I have to literally publicly say my name and artist name so that people can recognize me without an outfit I wear or something that piques their interest. Music levels have been overridden with corruption, scams, and fraud, and now even AI fraud and piracy. This is a huge driver of burnout in some people's minds, very vividly clear. It's the very thing hurting our minds, running our thinking capacity, and destroying the very expensive part of a human's nature. Randomness, clarity, emotional expression, nuance, confusion, love, harmony, and chemical tension is what that makes a human have a larger understanding of music and art. What comes to mind is general music knowledge, and that has seemingly went to decline because not only is music discovery off the charts and rising, general music knowledge is decreasing, as in the understanding of how music works or what structures look like in the mind of somebody trying to perceive what is going on without music theory or prior music education, and someone's openness to try out new things without heading over to gatekeeping traits, feuds, personal bias, cultural expectations, and soundscape preferences. That bothers me more than the current politics now in the US. People's blatant picky nature has went up as much as their discovery of new music that leads to all the hate and gatekeeping I'm seeing from emotionally mature people trying to defend a music maker's private little world or media empire. We've made an entire natural instinct to just belittle music we don't even fully understand if it's not our cup of tea. Rather than critically reviewing it, it is what you see in the music industry now, where everything is a whole legal battlefield. You cannot name that many who still have that spark in them with the legal side of music business culture left. Even those in that culture, not many of them have the guts to be able to do what I do. There are not a lot of new guys who keep their chin up, right, and do that. There are many more who keep their chin up and bolster how many records they sell by sensationalizing an artist that they hired for their network to make profits off. Like, I know the amount of people making music has went up because digital audio workstations have become more accessible to people over time since the 90s, but everything chills back to how many more people were born and dragged into the industry on a whim once the tops caught on to the livestock that they can reel in by the wag of their finger. Sometimes I feel like the absolute losers in the music industry ran about are just distractions from taking real action as citizens of the planet Earth, and that is why from here on out on my journey to live in a better world, I'll commit to helping propel Motenism across the world in its glory to help humans bring back the real music scene we needed to see after almost 2 decades of a difficulty to figure out what musical or artistic era that we are in. One of the very examples of me mentioning and referencing that in a more broad and direct mannerism is the very album Identity Crisis that I made back then, when I said that this album is basically a form of way of me saying that I'm trying to make an album where each song is a whole different thing. And that in and of itself is like an identity crisis, which the very music scene is undergoing from the entire world as a whole. We need a new era to start, and I'm happy to have been here to have lived such a terrible era, to see with my own eyes what type of horrible seed can be born out of the blatant corruption we plant in the VC to plant something and come back more efficiency. After witnessing such adversity, racism, cruelty, discrimination, pain, and suffering coming from all sides, my purpose as to why I make music is just because of this. I have found a reason why I continue to keep going other than my love for music, but the music medium itself needs a new way to be seen in an ever-growing world of digital allure and AI dominance. The market needs Motenism as another extension to keeping technology and creativity being amended together in harmony in order to keep things in check. So with that said, arise, the Motenist, and go beyond limit and excel, which is what GBLAE means. So, the last line it says, arise, the Motenist, and GBLAE, but that is my music manifesto. That's what I think is what music is to me. I think from living through some of the people's worst times in their life, noticing what it looks like, living in it myself, where I basically have almost nothing to lose, along with seeing people having nothing to lose do some of the most craziest things because they have no choice. I'm in a spot where I'd have to do anything to continue to have face. I already have a face. I simply don't have enough people looking at it. If anybody knows where that phrase comes from, you know where it comes from. I already have a face, I simply don't have enough looking at it. When there's not enough eyes on it, clearly there's not clearly a large enough audience to be able to spread the word and see what they think. When there's not enough of that, clearly it's not spreading that idea around. Most people I meet clearly don't have faces because they don't know how life works. They don't know how the industry works. They're young. They're inexperienced. Even 40-year-old adults that I know who live in really hard labor. Even they aren't experienced. Why? Because they never got to experience education, right? They never got to experience a proper education. They never experienced a proper life. They never experienced proper interactions with people other than the co-workers that they live with or work with. They clearly have never seen the faces of people from Japan, from Asia in general, all different countries. They never seen the culture there. They've never seen all the faces, colors, and cruelty from those countries. Why? They clearly don't have an experience or knack for interest in these countries. Why? Because they simply don't have a choice. If they were told that you have 1,000 years to live on the planet Earth, would have they changed their look on the Earth if they were given 1,000 years to live, rather than a measly 40 years to live during retirement? This is what I feel like has been a thing in human culture, in human history, throughout music's expansion across the world, along with art itself. For me, art is a whole larger sum of different factors combined together that stem from very human evolution itself. When I see human beings continue to trivialize things, the most smallest of things, they're not trivializing the things that do matter. Most of the times they trivialize the things that matter to only themselves, rather than to what could matter to the entire world as a whole whenever they pass away themselves. Immortality still hasn't been found out. We live in an era where mortality is still a thing. Immortality doesn't mean somebody who's unkillable. It means somebody who's not able to live forever or who can live forever. When that's like something that isn't visited upon or never thought about, I lived around a very short lifespan enough to be able to gather such data and put it together in concrete forms of ways that will make things more understandable for me to put together and with more nuance. Nuance has been something that I've seen has been lost in this current era, the current era where the United States is basically a collapsing empire. If you were to look at it, strip all of the technology, strip all the savvy, remove all of the branding, the corporatism, and all of the capitalist things that you think in your head. When you look at the very countries around the world, they're still kingdoms, empires themselves. merely rebranding themselves constantly. Rebranding as a word is something that came from the modern world, not the past medieval Middle Eastern world that we usually are seeing about. Like most people who I talk to wouldn't be able to tell me about the Arabic Revolution. They wouldn't tell me that. They don't even know it. They don't know it exists. They don't know about Japan's huge explosion in the 1800s or the 1900s when imperialism was such at a high. Imperialism has been a thing. It's just been reworded and put into new words, new contexts, in books that usually secularize everything together and sensationalize it all the way to its core. The very meanings of the very reasons why we think and put things together is so simple minded in this era where people cannot think rational discussions, they can't think up of their own ideas. Their theories are more conspiracies than theories. Theories are something that are really rare to be visited upon. Looking at it in more scientific prowess, in more scientific narrative, rather than a scientific, like, I'm going to teach you to get curious about science, most people often forget about the very first fundamental parts about learning something new. Like, whenever you teach a kid how to learn science, you need to first teach him how to get curious about learning science, not learning the science itself. You need to first get them curious about why they have to be curious about learning something that's called science. Human language has never been taught that at a very young age until it's put into their brain in order for them to perceive and understand such. This is something that's a science that can be studied, that has been studied for a very long time. On this channel, I've visited numerous different aspects and topics around the human neurosciences and all these other things, along with computer, art, music, and athleticism, and physiology of the human body, anatomy. And I've learned many things around different intercultural events and all these other events that happen to do with space science and how humans get together and how humans kill each other and remove each other from existence. Something that I noticed is, like, when you look at it as like a cell, it's like a cancerous cell going after other cells and trying to remove the inferior ones, just as we poetically write about it ourselves in books when we say that something is removing the cancer. It's like the same thing as removing the indigenous out of the human being, which is a racist way of saying that we're moving the native Indian out of the American, who should be white, who should be cleaned and should be sanitized. That those are words that were rebranded and reworded to sound like if it was okay, which it has a scientific type of sounding element to it. Just as you can see Christian nationalism be a thing, Christian nationalism is a religious type of factor of things. But whenever they say that we are sanitizing the human race, suddenly starts to sound scientific, because sanitizing means cleaning, eradicating, removing things, removing or preventing something from going back, right? Like when you are preventing violence is not saying that you are engaging in violence in order to prevent the violence. You need to put lots of different acts in order to pause something and stop it in its tracks, in order to effectively stop it from happening. Most that I know about, and most human beings that I know, who I wish I could name, cannot think about prevention. They can't think about original ideas. They can't think for themselves or think further than what they see in front of their face. Most of them don't ever think about nuance anymore. And this is troubling with every person that I know. Even the smartest people I know, who I think I would trust with my own life, sometimes they have times where they're like flat faced. And flat face is not something you often see come in conversations with people who often, most of the times, don't have the intellectual capacity to be able to keep up to such. And these very videos and channels, I often have to even express an emotion for people to be able to see me as weaker and more inferior on purpose in order to win an argument. An argument and debate has been also mixed together. A debate and an argument are not the same thing, which is why the very two words are separate words and not the same word. This is the trouble with that, is that most human beings in this era are not being taught those nuances. They're not being taught those preventive measures. They're not being taught fundamental thinking capacity, simple cognitive tasks. They're not being taught relative bias. Nobody's getting there in this education system, nor will you see it around the world every time. The world's currently focused, most on 70% of the time, I tell you, most of the world is fixated on authoritarianism rather than the fundamental aspects that are at threat now, which is the very carnal desire for human beings to slash at each other, and hate people who they think are rather inferior. Not only is it just disguised as a cultural revolution is a lie. It's not a real thing until you put all the necks together. You put all the webs together of all these other things combining together, and you would realize that it's just a small factor of human beings that are causing all these issues. Not only is the very thing, death is the last thing that keeps them safe, death will be the very last deciding factor. Just recently, somebody tried to kill Donald Trump again. Maybe somebody who's a friend of Donald Trump. Somebody tried it again. Would removing him from the world do a thing? They remove him from presidency, but JD Vance will come in. What about JD Vance? He's younger, brighter, less old. As corrupt as Donald Trump, we don't know until he's the very president himself. This is the very issue about it. I'm seeing kids who says, fuck gay people. They hate, they're racist at 6 years old, 8 years old. You're finding that. Fundamentally, should children be racist? Are they taught racism? They are taught racism. They're told it's fine. They're told it's a thing that should be okay. How does this translate to music? Music's very own premise is to make sure you visit all the frequencies that you can hear possible on a human ear. Textures, sensations, illusions, all of these things that are really about the audible spectrum that you can visit through a human ear, which has a frequency measurement, because remember, we did the science for how much a human can hear, right? Ultrasound, there's X-rays, there's UV rays, right? All these other things, right? There's also the color spectrum that you can visibly see with the human eye. Something that most people that I often talk with often forget about, the very small things that form out the reason why we're able to experience such cruelty and experience such delight. Like whenever you ask out a girl, or whenever you play a song for a person that you like, or why when you fall down you get hurt. Songs were born from the very simple desires of human beings wanting to spat out what they feel, what they experience, and what they are trying to put into words through the forms of frequencies that we often get entranced by, like ants whenever they receive pheromones. When ants receive pheromones, they're following orders, but instead we have we have like a nuanced brain, a multifunctional system type of brain that's able to receive all sorts of different signals and interpretations from the very same sounds that we hear separately from difference. This was tested throughout numerous tests on human psychology and human response to music across decades. And lots of the times, lots of early music was literally the very exploration of human pain. Human pain, love in simple words, in different languages. Lots of humans often sung about their surroundings because they had no other way to be able to explain such. They lived in different primitive worlds, just as Beethoven was producing his compositions. Even though he was impaired in some place, he still produced masterpieces. But the only thing he could express was people, stories, and fictional stories that were formed inside his head. Now, these days, we already have what Beethoven doesn't have. We visualize flying planes. We can see planes. There are songs about planes. There's songs called Cloud 9. There's songs called Airborne or Ultraborn. These are just phrases and spins of the same very thing, right? Just like how we can rebrand cruelty to teaching kids how to be racist and being really sexist at an early age, we can teach kids to be geniuses like a violin prodigy at 6 years old, 9 years old. We can do those things. Genetically, the only thing that comes in the way is genetics or some disease that somebody might have caught. But those are very small margins of people that exist in this very planet. Music has lots of attachments to those, as there are still disabled people who make music themselves. You know, lots of AI stands forgot about that. Lots of humans will find different ways to be able to express themselves. Because why? Because humans are constantly born and dying at an age less than 100 most of the time, statistically. Every time you see somebody have a music career, often it's 20, 30 years, the longest average minimum, right? The longest average would be 20, 30. The usual is like 5 to 10 years, 5 to 8 years, 5 to 10 years is like the usual amount for an artist to go, okay, I made my career, I stopped, I kind of got money, maybe I'll stop, it's not doing a thing for me, I'm gonna get a full-time job because this music's not sustainable. Some of them are lucky enough to go on for 20, 30 years, which is really rare. An example is Infected Mushroom. They have been going on for over 30 years. They've had their 30th anniversary. They're still young, they're still producing music, they still have the ears and knack for these things. Their ears could have already developed tinnitus by the time that they reached the 30th anniversary, but yet they're still performing well because they took care of their ears themselves and were socially aware of their various surroundings of different countries that they often visit for these concerts. These very things are very nuanced, and sometimes people don't, I don't think, clearly see that, is that there's much more than just a word that you look at by face value. A lot of people that I meet often takes things at face value without thinking and putting a single thought, and don't even let me emphasize what I mean by such, because unfortunately they don't have the experience to explain such. They don't have the experience to live through it the same way I did. Unfortunately, with how humans are and how we can't teach students fundamental rules and rights and things that you shouldn't do on the internet, most kids don't have the fundamental education in order to understand how the internet should be operated, should be functioned in, how you operate in within a system, because you clearly are operating within a system based on the internet. Now, in the digital world, this very thing is already tested. There's already a placebo effect that forms even on the internet itself. There are syndromes that form from the very internet itself. Just like how every human noticed that you can't kill large things with a stick for a long time, we started finding out that there is sound equipment that you can do. They can invent sound machinery to stop protesters from protesting, because it's so scary. There are frequencies that go in your ear with the sound equipment, because this has been a thing recently, by the way. The government's using sound machinery to get off protesters, get them away off from protesting by certainly transmitting certain frequencies that would irritate their ears and cause them to have hearing loss. Most people that I know don't even know hearing loss even exists, or don't even think about it seriously until they turn 53. I've warned them like every time. Trust me. As a musician myself, I tell people, hey, careful with the volume. You're gonna lose hearing, and you're gonna regret it. If you have nothing to live for once you hit your 50s, trust me, it's a horrible idea. You should probably have started something by then. I know there are artists out there who started at 32, 34 years old at their music career. One example is Roy the Rapper. He started in his 30s. He started late in his music career, and he's learning. He could have started at 6, 10, 14, as it went to straight by when he was 18, could have attended school, college, university. No, he started at 30. In his 30s, he started learning how to make music. There is a disabled person I know who makes music with their arms. They lost a leg. They don't go around normally as often, but why are they still able to play the keyboard and the guitar? Those limitations and the illusions of limitations on the human body, or the fundamental aspects like their cognitive bias and the rhetoric bias, that's something that's been growing up a little bit on the off ramp recently. So cognitive bias often is used a lot more from people who have been extremely pushed into parentified angles, right? I was parentified at a young age. This is something that has already been proven by how I, at a younger age, was able to put down more words than all of my classmates combined together. Combined together, my classmates weren't able to produce the same amount of work that I did by myself with $0. They couldn't. It's impossible. Statistically, they couldn't. The only way somebody could have is if they made their entire own thing. Just like how much effort I put into M7. You do not find from the very classroom I get. Very few can get there. So whenever somebody is like saying, what is something that you'd rather have more of? Intelligence and wisdom are not the same thing, right? Just as music and art are not the same thing. They're more like cousins, and I see it as a cousin relationship. When I see intelligence go up, that only tells you what you can do more of, because you have more accessibility to do things that will make you go into many. And I can't even put this into words, because intelligence merely is like the ability to be able to access the ability to do more things, right? Wisdom is merely a way of principle that gives you an ability to understand how you do those things and what you will use it for. Basically, your intention. Intelligence is basically right after. It's the end result. Wisdom is the very part that you get to first. Music has been extremely devalued in these past few years. And you can see it everywhere you go. Everywhere you go, music's devalued. Art is devalued. Even everywhere I go, even people who should normally know this as much as I do not know what I'm talking about. That is a concerning thing. I go on the internet, 80% chance I find somebody doesn't know more than 5 artists. All right? That is concerning. Yes, it should be. How many kids do I know do not know how to follow the rules on the internet? There is an over 90% chance there is a kid out there who I know who is my cousin underneath 10 years old who will break the rules on the internet every single time because that's just the norm. Just as music is devalued, there is high chance I will find a kid who says, "Oh, music, I don't care about that. I think if I like, I like." That is fundamentally wrong. I went through this in the first 10-20 minutes of the very video when I read that manifesto. When I read such manifesto, what came into my mind was how kids will fundamentally pick these skills. An open awareness, an open mind is something that is required in music, in art, in creation itself. That is something Motenism tries to make easier to understand, something easier to implement in the brains of children, teenagers, and adults, all alike, regardless of where they came from, regardless of what language, what gender or sex that they are, right? What age or what part of the internet come from. Motenism is not only just expansive, it also makes sure that when you understand expansive methods of understanding and you have this huge exposure at helm that you control, it always teaches you that right now, utility power is essential in order to continue to practice those very intellectual actions that you'll soon take while practicing Monism. Monism is the very thing that helps you understand that utility power comes before expansion. Utility power comes before expansion for numerous different reasons. Utility power is the very ability to give somebody the very same ability that you have to create that one video on YouTube, for example, that you're able to produce yourself. For example, I can make this a little easier to understand. Mr. Beast has expansive power. He has an expansive brand that reaches technically to the entire world. His very brand itself is global, international, but is his brand high in utility power? It's not high in utility power. He's not giving the other people around the world the same power to do the same content he does. So he's therefore not giving them utility power. Utility is like essentials. You need it required, something that helps you be able to do the same exact thing that that person you see on your screen do. For example, say if Amazon, Jeff Bezos, were able to give people the same ability to do his type of business, that would mean he would give his people utility power. Motenism tries to boldly and bolster that part about it. Expansive power should always be a second thought. Expansive power comes to those who put it in first, who would visualize in that way, in order to further self-indulge in their stories and their delusions in order to pass on such narratives to help prevent themselves from a larger understanding and larger awareness of something that has lots of complications that come with it. And as well as around, so whenever I visited such, I look into the many different projects that I've done and all the projects that people that I've seen who also made videos on the very same issue that I pointed out on my channel. This is problematic, right? People will find any reason to hate something, to indulge themselves. That is a mere human trait of nature when humans have to hunt down prey in order to survive in some of the worst human eras possible that has been explained numerous times on this YouTube channel. I don't need to explain that. There are numerous videos out there for you in which human history, music happens to have stood out as a very essential factor in giving people the power to express themselves. The very suppression of expression is a very depression on society. And as always, stay safe. The Projecttian here. I've been at this for 8 years. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like on the video, and subscribe as well. We're trying to reach the 10K goal. Link in the description that link in the description down below for my Discord server. I stuttered. And as always, stay safe.